Chapter 10, the Roaring Twenties. This, of course, is Chapter 10 of the Jarrett book. And we are going to look at the vocabulary terms of the Roaring Twenties. Let us begin. And here we have a slide with the first five. We're going to walk through these together. You should have your terms in front of you. And so let us begin. The Roaring Twenties, the term itself. And, of course, this is the decade of 1920 through 1929, which was a period of great, and I think the term great is understated or underused there, a period of great economic, social, political, and industrial growth in America. In my opinion, the 20s, along with the 1960s, are the two most influential decades in American history in terms of change. And we're going to see a great deal of change in America, in American history, in the way we do things. Again, going back to economic, social, political, industrial growth. We're going to see change unlike ever before. Number two, return to normalcy. This was Warren G. Harding's campaign slogan. Harding was a Republican running for president in 1920, and he promised a return to normalcy, which means a return from wartime America to a peacetime America. So Harding's campaign, this was his slogan. He was referring to a less ambitious foreign policy, and again, foreign policy refers to World War I, and a greater emphasis on peace and prosperity. And this is the key word, prosperity. The 1920s will be dominated by Republicans. And we'll take a look at the three Republican presidents during the 20s, and we're going to look at Harding right now. All of them believed in laissez-faire economics, and we've talked about laissez-faire economics before. All three Republicans and the Republican-dominated Congress throughout much of the 20s believed in this laissez-faire, hands-off government, allow business to grow. As long as business is, following the rules more or less, they're not killing too many people. As long as people are working and making money, the government believed that we should not get involved. That's laissez-faire. Number three, Red Scare. This is going to dominate a huge chunk of the 20s. This, of course, is the first Red Scare. There will be a second after World War II. And this, of course, is based on the spread of communism. Okay. Communism and the color red are associated with each other throughout history. And toward the end of World War I, Russia, the Russian government led by Tsar Nicholas, was overthrown by the Communist Party led by Vladimir Lenin. And once the communists take over Russia, they signed a separate peace agreement with Germany, ending their efforts in the war. And so communism spread throughout Russia, and once the war was over, we began to get a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe, from Russia, and there was a huge concern that these individuals were a threat to America. Hence the red referring to communism. Okay, red referring to communism. The Red Scare was a fear of communism coming to America and creating some of the damage, some of the havoc that they saw in Eastern Europe and in Russia. Number four, the Teapot Dome scandal. This was discovered shortly after Harding died in office. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. It involved his cabinet secretaries, and these are individuals who are in charge of different cabinet positions, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Education, Secretary of War, eventually it's the Secretary of Defense, but all of those individuals are part of the President's cabinet. And so several of the cabinet secretaries, these are the men, at this time only men, who were in charge of these government agencies. They were exchanging oil-rich lands in an area known as the Teapot Dome. So they, the people in charge, were exchanging oil-rich lands for personal bribes. They were being bribed by individuals. They would give money to the Secretary of Interior was one of them, and in exchange for this land and the ability to drill for oil on this land, they were bribed. They were given boatloads of money. Let's go to number 5. Warren Harding, elected president in 1920. He sought a return to normalcy, greater rights for African Americans, and he very much supported anti-lynching laws. Now keep in mind, Harding is a Republican. Up to this point in our nation's history, the Democrat Party has been the party of racism, and the party of the Confederacy, the party of lynching, the party of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, which we'll see and discuss a little bit later on. The Democrat Party very much, well, again, I wouldn't say that they favored lynching, but again, all the lynching that was done by members of the Democrat Party. And so Harding represents the Republican Party, who sought a return to normalcy, and we talked about a return to normalcy a little bit earlier. Okay, he was looking for more peace and prosperity at home. Again, that's what Harding was running on, and he wanted greater rights for African Americans, something that has never really been done much before, particularly by the previous presidents. Woodrow Wilson has a reputation of being somewhat of a racist. He did not allow blacks to serve in desegregated regiments of the military during World War I. Again, he wasn't the only one, but he's the most recent. Even the two Republicans before Wilson, Roosevelt and Taft, didn't really do a whole lot to help African Americans, and Warren Harding is really one of the first. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Number 6, Calvin Coolidge, and we'll probably do about 15 to 20 vocabulary terms in this first video, and then we'll finish it up in another video. Coolidge was the VP under Harding. He ran as Harding's VP in 1920, and when Harding died relatively suddenly in 1923, about 2 years, give or take, a few months into his presidency, Coolidge now becomes president. So Coolidge is Harding's VP in 1920. They are elected. Harding dies relatively suddenly. He is not murdered. He's not shot. He dies of an illness in 1923, which means that he still has several years left in his term. Keep in mind that he was elected in 1920, but he did not take office until, I don't know why I put a 2 there. He was not inaugurated until 1921. So you're elected in November of 1920. He was inaugurated in probably March, maybe April of 21. So he dies in 23. So we're looking at 2 years, give or take a month or so. So he still had a couple of years left in his term at the time of his death, and we're talking about Harding. So that 2-year period of time was filled by Calvin Coolidge, who was Harding's VP. Harding had a very pro-business policy. His hands-off policy, laissez-faire, did lead to the stock market crash of 29. Again, it wasn't only his, but Harding's pro-business and his hands-off policies, laissez-faire, were continued by Calvin Coolidge. Again, he was a Republican at that time, and Republicans basically were very pro-business. They were big believers in laissez-faire, that hands-off. Now, was this good? Yeah, if you were a businessman, and we see tremendous growth of individuals, wealth, like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, and others, Henry Ford. We see tremendous growth of those the personal wealth of those individuals, and many others. But we also see some unsound banking practices, some unsound practices concerning the stock market. We'll talk about the stock market a little bit later on, but right now, did the pro-business policies of the Republicans in this period of time lead to the stock market collapse? I wouldn't say it was the policies that led to them, but their policies did make or create an environment where a situation was ripe, where we would have the stock market crash. So, laissez-faire economics, pro-business economics, does not lead to a stock market crash. It can, In this case, it did, but it's not necessarily A follows B, C follows B. It did this time, but it doesn't necessarily always happen that way. Okay, let's move on. Number 7, Herbert Hoover. He is the third of the Republican presidential winners. You have Harding, you have Coolidge, and you have Hoover. Hoover won in 1928, as it states right here. He served during World War I. He oversaw food production during World War I. So he was a part of the Wilson administration. Wilson was a Democrat. Herbert Hoover is a Republican. And so he oversaw the food production during World War I. He ran for and won the presidency in 1928. This, of course, is after Harding, his partial term, and then Coolidge fulfilling Harding's term and then running for his own term in 24. And then in 28, he did not run. Hoover ran and won. And Hoover continued the pro-business policies of the 2 previous presidents, which would be Herbert Hoover. I'm sorry, not Herbert Hoover. We're talking about Herbie. Which would be Calvin Coolidge and Warren. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry, something happened. I got kicked off for a second. Let me finish that last thought, or we go over it again. So Herbert Hoover continued the policies. Continued the policies of the 2 previous presidents, who were both Republicans, Calvin Coolidge and Warren Harding. So in 20, we have Warren Harding elected. Calvin Coolidge takes over when Harding dies in 23, wins election in 24, and then Hoover wins in 28. And all 3 of the Republican presidents were very big believers in government hands-off policies of laissez-faire. All right, let's continue. Number 8, rugged individualism. This is the belief in the ability of a person to excel at anything given an opportunity and the desire to work. Now, again, a lot of components of this. Rugged individualism goes back to the Pilgrims, goes back to Plymouth Rock, goes back to Jamestown. It goes through every event which has occurred in American history. It's about rugged individualism. Everything Americans have ever done up to this point we're discussing, and well, even up to relatively recently, has been rugged individualism. Putting men on the moon, building the Panama Canal, fighting World War I, World War II, Orville and Wilbur Wright, on and on and on. Rugged individualism. This concept is something that is not unique to America, but is found more often in America than other places because of our system of government, because of our belief in the individual worth of individuals. Our belief that everyone can be successful, everybody can excel if they have opportunity, and this is the most important one, the desire to work. This kind of goes back to Teddy Roosevelt's square deal policies we talked about several chapters ago. Teddy believed as long as people were given a fair opportunity and they worked, they could be successful. So Teddy's square deal policy was real simple. A square deal. Again, this is a cards metaphor, poker, blackjack. Doesn't really matter what game we're talking about. As long as the cards are dealt fairly, squarely, there's no cheating. Anyone and everyone can be successful based on their desire to work, their opportunities, and probably a little bit of talent. So a person can excel, a person can win if they have an opportunity. If there's a square deal, the opportunity is there. They're not cheated. If the opportunity is there and they're willing to work, they can be and will be successful based on this concept of rugged individualism. Henry Ford, engineer and early automobile manufacturer. This is so lame as a definition. Henry Ford revolutionized the world. Now, Henry Ford did not invent the automobile. That was done decades before, probably by some Russian, okay? He didn't make the first car in America. That was done decades before. What Henry Ford did, which is most important, as an engineer, he created a system in which automobiles could be mass-produced in large numbers. The modern assembly line that we still use to this day was created by Henry Ford. He made use of interchangeable parts. You buy a car in Edinburgh, it breaks down in Tennessee, you can buy a part. You just replace the part. You don't replace the entire car, you just replace the part. Whether we're talking about bicycles or automobiles or anything else. Interchangeable parts. Division of labor. Under Henry Ford's system, each individual worker on the assembly line did one or two things, and that's all they did. Let us say I'm on the assembly line, and this is a moving assembly line. Not you go to the car comes to you. And I do believe there's a picture, not in this slide presentation, but in the American Republic book we'll take a look at. It shows you a cutaway of his factory. And so the car comes to you, and all you do is you put on the steering wheel. I'm sorry, I was cut off again. Let me repeat that. So there's a cutout of a factory in the American Republic book. I am on the assembly line. The car comes to me. All I do is I put on the steering wheel, put the steering wheel on, and I attach it to the column, and I put on the 4 tires, and that's all I do. So since that's all I do, day after day, car after car, I become very good at it. I do it very quickly, which means the car can go from my station to the next station more quickly than ever before, which means we can produce more cars because everybody else is doing the exact same thing. They're doing what they do. They install the engine, put the seats in, install the windows. It doesn't matter what it is. The more repetitions, the faster, the better you get at it, the faster we produce cars. So what on our first day, let's say we all start working the same time the first day, it may take us all day to finish one car. In a couple of days, we'll be able to do 5 or 6 cars. And then in a couple of weeks or months, we'll be able to do 50, 60, 100 cars a day because we get better. We get faster through repetition. Prohibition. Prohibition, the manufacturing, the selling, and consumption of alcohol. This was a result of a long-standing attempt by women's groups, temperance groups, to end alcohol consumption. It was felt that alcohol was a huge problem within the family, that men were excessively drinking, which caused abuse at home of the wife or the children. They were spending way too much money on alcohol. They were spending too much time at the saloons where gambling and women and all kinds of evil things were taking place according to the women. So they wanted to end it, and they did. Prohibition ended the manufacturing, the selling, the consumption of alcohol. Was this a good idea? Well, yeah. At the time they thought it was. Did it end well? No. No, it didn't. Because it created criminals of everyone who wanted a drink. Little old blue-haired 90-year-old women who never had a drink in their lives are now drinking because it's sexy, because it's fun, because it is breaking the law, and they're feeling naughty. And they never did anything like that before in their lives. Now they're doing it. More importantly, though, that's pretty important. We're basically creating a system that creates criminals. More importantly, it gave rise to organized crime. Organized. That's a G. Crime. The mob. Al Capone. Gangsters. And I don't mean little boys walking up and down the hallway with their pants halfway down the butt looking stupid, with their hat on sideways and backwards looking like an idiot. I mean gangsters. Real gangsters. And we'll talk more about Al Capone and gangsters as we go, but these are bad men. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop this video at this point, or this part of the video at this point. I want to keep these videos around 20, 22 minutes or so, and we're approaching 20 minutes now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it, and we will continue with vocabulary term number 11 in the next video.